The shooter in El Paso posted a manifesto online consumed by racist hate. In one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. These sinister ideologies must be defeated. Hate has no place in America. Hatred warps the mind, ravages the heart, and devours the soul. We have asked the FBI to identify all further resources they need to investigate and disrupt hate crimes and domestic terrorism, whatever they need. We must recognize that the internet has provided a dangerous avenue to radicalize disturbed minds and perform demented acts. We must shine light on the dark recesses of the internet and stop mass murders before they start. The internet, likewise, is used for human trafficking, illegal drug distribution, and so many other heinous crimes. The perils of the internet and social media cannot be ignored, and they will not be ignored. In the 2 decades since Columbine, our nation has watched with rising horror and dread as one mass shooting has followed another, over and over again, decade after decade. We cannot allow ourselves to feel powerless. We can and will stop this evil contagion. In that task, we must honor the sacred memory of those we have lost by acting as one people. Open wounds cannot heal if we are divided. We must seek real bipartisan solutions. We have to do that in a bipartisan manner that will truly make America safer and better for all. First, we must do a better job of identifying and acting on early warning signs. I am directing the Department of Justice to work in partnership with local, state, and federal agencies, as well as social media companies, to develop tools that can detect mass shooters before they strike. As an example, the monster in the Parkland High School in Florida had many red flags against him, and yet nobody took decisive action. Nobody did anything. Why not? Second, we must stop the glorification of violence in our society. This includes the gruesome and grisly video games that are now commonplace. It is too easy today for troubled youth to surround themselves with a culture that celebrates violence. We must stop or substantially reduce this, and it has to begin immediately. Cultural change is hard, but each of us can choose to build a culture that celebrates the inherent worth and dignity of every human life. That's what we have to do. Third, we must reform our mental health laws to better identify mentally disturbed individuals who may commit acts of violence and make sure those people not only get treatment, but when necessary, involuntary confinement. Mental illness and hatred pulls the trigger, not the gun. Fourth, we must make sure that those judged to pose a grave risk to public safety do not have access to firearms, and that if they do, those firearms can be taken through rapid due process. That is why I have called for red flag laws, also known as extreme risk protection orders. Yes, go ahead, Mike.
Well, in the category, you've spoken about it, Mr. President, gun violence restraining orders. They're called. California actually has a version of this, and I think you, in your meeting with governors earlier this week, individually and as a group, we spoke about states taking steps. But the focus is to literally give families and give local law enforcement additional tools if an individual is reported to be a potential danger to themselves or others. Allow due process so that no one's rights are trampled, but the ability to go to court, obtain an order, and then collect not only the firearms, but any weapons in the possession of that individual.
Or might take the firearms first and then go to court, because that's another system. Because a lot of times, by the time you go to court, it takes so long to go to court to get the due process procedures, I like taking the guns early, like in this crazy man's case that just took place in Florida. He had a lot of firearms. They saw everything. To go to court would have taken a long time. So you could do exactly what you're saying, but take the guns first, go through due process second.
As a police officer, I get a lot of questions from viewers asking me what I think about the red flag laws that are going across the nation. So let's take a deeper look at these laws so that we're making better and more informed decisions about them. And in case somebody doesn't know what I'm talking about, some states are passing what's generally being called red flag laws, meaning that if a person is showing signs of being violent and dangerous, then their guns can be confiscated from them before they can kill someone or commit a mass shooting. And these laws are gaining notoriety across the country because of the mass killing of 17 people in Parkland that was perpetrated by a young man who was known to be mentally troubled but still had access to weapons. Basically what the law is intended for is that if somebody has gone off of the deep end and they start talking about killing people, then the law allows for cops to immediately take not just the crazy person's guns, but any weapons that that crazy person has before that person is able to carry out the killing or killings. And I think it's important to kind of clarify something. Depending on the county that you're in, it can take a couple of hours to get an emergency warrant signed by a judge. So if the police see that somebody has posted on social media that they're about to shoot up a school, they want to be able to get that person's weapons as quick as possible, because there might be a bunch of dead kids by the time they get that warrant signed off on. So anyways, I believe that the typical person's concerns about these red flag laws are, number one, that a false accusation from a person, such as an anti-gun neighbor or family member, can get a decent law-abiding person's guns confiscated, just purely based on that false accusation. And just to clarify that, an example would be, let's say you have a family member that's anti-gun, and this family member would just love to see you get your guns taken away. So this anti-gun family member decides to call the police and falsely tells the cops that you have been talking about shooting up a school in hopes that the cops come and take your guns away. And another concern from people is that when the guns are confiscated, that they are confiscated without any due process, which means that the cops are able to come and take the guns away without having to get a court order first. So for us to have a really good understanding of these laws, an understanding so that we can truly make informed decisions on them, we first need to make sure that we take a few legal things into account. The first thing is that it's individual states that are putting these red flags into place. This is not federal law, and this does not go across the whole nation. And then second, since it's a law passed by an individual state, the law is probably going to have some differences from state to state, meaning that one state may be really restrictive on the parameters before the government can seize the guns, while another state may be more lax, meaning that that government may not need a whole lot in order to immediately seize somebody's guns. And then third, as of the time of this video, which is early 2019, I believe that only 13 states have red flag laws. Meaning that the vast majority of states don't even have the law, so there's a high likelihood that you're not even affected by it. And just a side note, bills to introduce red flag laws were introduced in approximately 19 other states, with all of them being shot down. And another thing that we have to be familiar with is the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution that protects we, the people, from unreasonable searches and seizures, of course, amongst other things. And then we also need to be familiar with the 14th Amendment that also states that we, the people, have the right to due process anytime a person is arrested or their property is seized or whatever. So I live in a pretty conservative state, and my state has had a red flag law for over a decade now. And I can tell you this, there has not been a rash of police going around confiscating guns from law-abiding people. But again, I live in a pretty conservative state. And while I can't speak for other states and their red flag laws, here's the quick version of the red flag law in my state. First off, a person has to be considered a dangerous person and to also be an immediate danger to himself or others before his weapons can be immediately confiscated. And then that person still gets his day in court to argue for his weapons back. And to keep from going too deep into it and then turning this video into a movie, in my state, a simple, baseless, and false accusation from a person is not going to allow for a good person's guns to be immediately confiscated. My state's law is pretty clear that it has to be documented how this person is actually a danger and that the information on how that person is a danger is credible. Let me put it this way, if some anti-gunner calls the police, and of course we wouldn't know that he was an anti-gunner, but if this anti-gunner calls the police and says that his neighbor, who is actually a decent and normal person, but says that his neighbor has said that he is going to go shoot up a school, that one accusation is not going to be enough for the police in my state to go take that person's guns or weapons away. Now, if we have multiple people that tell us that a person is talking about shooting up a school, or we see social media posts from that person where they are talking about causing a high body count, or that person is schizophrenic and having hallucinations and talking dangerously, then and only then can we do an immediate confiscation of that person's weapons before they have a chance to actually carry out any murders. And then if we do an emergency gun confiscation, then we have to submit a probable cause affidavit to the court stating why it was credible that the person was dangerous and why he was an immediate danger to other people. If we fail to do this, then we open ourselves up for a lawsuit from the person who we took the guns or the weapons away from. Now the word credible is very important here because that helps to keep a good person's guns from being confiscated based only on some baseless accusation from one person or some anti-gunner. With my state putting the word credible in the law, that gives the government a standard that it must abide by before taking anybody's guns away under the red flag law. And a lot of people don't realize this, but if a cop is found to be in the wrong, then he can personally be sued along with his police department. So if I do a seizure that's later found to be a bad seizure in court, and let's just say because I seized a person's guns from information that was not credible, then I open myself up to a lawsuit. And that lawsuit will not only list my police department that I work for, but it will also list me personally, which means I risk having to pay out thousands of dollars out of my personal bank account to that guy whose guns I took. So needless to say, in my state, if somebody tells us that a friend or a family member or a neighbor has guns and they're also talking about shooting up a school, then we're not going to take a person's guns based on that one accusation. We're going to make contact with the accused person and see if they're acting normal or see if they're acting crazy, such as acting schizophrenic or something like that. Then we're also going to look to see if this person is making any deranged social media posts that talks about committing violent acts. And then we're going to talk to additional family members to see if they've actually heard that person making any violent or truly crazy statements. And then if we don't find anything to make that one person's accusation credible, then we cannot confiscate that accused person's guns. Because I, for one, besides being a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, I am not going to risk having to stand in a courtroom full of people and have a defense attorney make me look like a fool in front of everyone, along with then risking a lawsuit against myself. But let's just say that I do get credible information that a person is actually a dangerous person, and that he's also talking about shooting up a school, and then I do actually do an immediate weapons confiscation under my state's red flag law. In my state, the court, by law, the court has 14 days to hold a hearing to decide if the confiscation was legal or not, and if the guns should remain temporarily confiscated, or if they have to be released back to the owner right there. But let's say that the court rules that the information has all appearances of being credible and not just some baseless accusation, then the gun owner still gets a later court date to fight for those guns back. So now let's revisit the Fourth Amendment, which protects us from unreasonable seizures, again amongst other things. My personal belief is that if a person is truly dangerous, a person that's talking about killing an innocent person or innocent people, or a schizophrenic that's having hallucinations and hearing voices, my personal belief is that it is not an unreasonable seizure to take all weapons away from a person like that. And let's also revisit the due process part of the Constitution. So while yes, when probable cause exists that shows that a person is about to kill others, that his guns and weapons can be immediately seized to prevent him from carrying out those killings, this person still gets his due process. He gets at least 2 court dates, the first one being within 14 days, to have his side heard in court. Now, I know of a popular story that's been raised many times by people who believe that the red flag law is unjust and is going to lead to the police using that law as a reason to kill gun owners and seize their guns. And that being the story of a guy in Maryland who was shot and killed by the police when they came to his house to seize his guns under that state's red flag law. So first, just let me say this. I was not there, so I cannot say for certain definitely what happened. I cannot say if the cops or the homeowner was in the right or the wrong. But in this incident, somebody had gotten a protection order against that guy. And this protection order, also known as a PO, actually ordered that he could not be in possession of any firearms while this protection order was in effect. Now, before we go any further, let me explain how POs generally work, at least in my state. A PO is typically where a person says that another person is a danger to them, and the PO is a court order that commands that the accused person must stay away from the accuser. And other than being told to stay away from somebody, a PO will almost always not change the accused person's life in any other way. Their weapons won't be confiscated, etc. They're just only told to stay away from whoever got the PO against them. But some POs can actually state that the accused person shouldn't be in possession of any weapons until after the PO expires 2 years later or however long they last. And these types of POs are very few and far between. In my almost 20 years, I've only seen a handful of those while I've seen hundreds of regular POs. And I believe that's because it has to be shown in court with some kind of evidence that the accused is known to be armed and has shown a propensity to want to actually cause great harm to the accuser. So now that everybody has a little bit of information on POs, let's go back to the Maryland man that was killed by the cops who came to his house to seize his guns and to also serve him with a PO. First, my view on the case is from nearly 20 years of police experience, so it kind of helps me to read between the lines when I read a news story like this. My experience helps me to understand some of the nuances of a story when a news story doesn't mention everything. So with my knowledge of how POs work, and the fact that his PO wasn't a typical one and was one that prohibited him from possessing weapons, that tells me that the guy probably did pose some kind of actual threat. Now, I'm not saying that for certain, but it just makes me lean that way because what my experience has shown me the past nearly 20 years. Secondly, it also appears that when he came to the door for the cops that he actually answered the door with his gun in his hand. Now, if the cops were actually out to use that law to shoot law-abiding gun owners and seize their guns, the cops probably would have shot him the second he opened the door with his gun in his hand. I mean, let's face it, it would have been pretty easy for them to justify their immediate shooting of him when they went to serve him with a PO that said he was a dangerous person. So this actually tells me that the cops weren't actually trying to kill this guy. This tells me that they just wanted to serve that PO to the guy and get his gun and just be done with it. So then it appears that the guy then laid down the gun next to his door, and then as the cops were reading the PO to the guy, that the guy then became irate and then started to pick up the gun again, where the cops then struggled with the man for the gun, and then the guy actually fired the gun a couple of times during that struggle, and then with it ending with the cop shooting and killing the guy. So when you put all of this stuff together, the fact that the guy answered the door with his gun in his hand, then he became so irate at the PO that he went for the gun again, and the fact that a struggle ensued where the guy actually fired the gun, this just leads me to believe that the guy was probably actually a violent person that was a danger to innocent people. Now again, I'm not saying that this is for certain. He could have been an upstanding citizen who had truly done nothing wrong. But with my experience, and with how it appears that the events unfolded, it makes me lean towards that the guy was probably a violent person that was presenting a danger to others. And I know that's probably going to be an unpopular opinion with some of you, but I'm not going to sugarcoat my thoughts and what experience tells me. So my thoughts on red flag laws? I think that if you live in a very conservative area that puts restrictions to keep the law from being used as a way to just confiscate guns, then I think it helps to keep guns out of the hands of people who will commit mass murders and give anti-gunners more ammo to enact more gun laws. No pun intended. But if I lived in a left-leaning state where the majority of the populace, from the citizens all the way up to the government, all leaned anti-gun, then I think red flag laws in states like those could be ripe for abuse and could actually be used as a way to take guns away from good people.
Now, I know a lot of people are on the fence about red flag laws, and the only reason they are on the fence is because they're being fed a line of total bullshit by the NRA and their little paid monkeys and spokesmen like Collier Noir and Hickok 45, who go out there and are more than happy to feed you a line of bullshit as long as it keeps the money coming in. So stop listening to those assholes. They're selling you garbage to try to strip you of your rights, because that's how the NRA makes its money, is stripping you of your rights and then making you scared about it and having you give them money. So stop listening to them. The truth about red flag laws is, like I said, they are one of the greatest affronts to our freedom in this country. One of the greatest protections of a free citizen is due process. Red flag laws remove due process. No matter what John Hickok told you about how, oh, it's still due process, it's got to go in front of a judge and blah, blah, blah. That's bullshit. The way these laws are written, it completely removes due process. For one, it completely excludes the person accused from the process. They can offer no defense. They're not even allowed to be involved or know of the process. That's not due process. Also, these laws don't set up a place or a system where a judge can look at a case and go, you know, I think this is a dangerous situation, I'm going to issue a protective order. No, it creates a situation where a judge's hands are tied. It creates a rubber stamp for protective orders, meaning if a person fills out the right form, the judge has to rubber stamp it. And then the police have the authority to go seize a person's firearms after they not only have not been included in the process, there's been no process whatsoever. It was a rubber stamp. So these people have neither been convicted nor even actually accused of an actual crime, yet their rights are removed from them by law enforcement. These laws are dangerous. Some states are even taking it to the next step now. Some states, like Washington, are saying, well, we want it to go even further. We want it to be where if an officer is ever on a domestic violence call, even if no one is charged, you have to remove all the firearms from the home. If someone is charged, you definitely have to remove all the firearms from the home, regardless of who they belong to. Meaning, if you have two couples sharing a house and one couple gets into an argument and the police show up and take one person to jail, they seize the firearms of every person in that household. And to me, that makes no sense. Because if that one person is to get out of jail and come back and try to do harm, wouldn't you want the people left in the house to be armed and be able to defend themselves? That just doesn't make sense to me. In fact, when it comes to protective orders and restraining orders against individuals who they're so worried are going to go back and shoot somebody, which is a very tiny percentage of the time. And let's keep in mind that just because you take someone's gun and he wants to kill his wife doesn't mean he's not going to kill his wife. People get strangled every day or beaten to death with pipes or, whatever. So that whole notion that without a gun, in fact, if you look at a lot of the most famous spouse killings in the last several years, they haven't been by guns, they've been by strangulation. So pretending that if you take his gun, she's totally safe. That's ridiculous. The way she'd be safer is if she had a gun in case he comes back beating on the door. That's how the women would be safer, not these red flag laws to disarm the people who have been, not, like I said, not even accused of a crime, much less convicted of one. So red flag laws are a great threat. They are something that no American citizens should support. No one should ever support the suspension of due process. Now, like in Washington, I got to stand there in the court hearing or the actual Senate hearing while the police officers stood up there one after one going, well, we arrest these people. And then before we can even have a protection order issued, they get out of jail and they're back home. So what if they decide to do something violent? Well, here's a good idea. If someone you arrest or you think is violent, don't let them out until they've been arraigned. Or get the protection order quickly before they're let out. How about you do your fucking job instead of saying, well, we just want a scapegoat mechanism that we can misuse anytime we want to and abuse anytime we want to. Because that's what red flag laws are. Any person can go in pretty much and say, I think this guy's dangerous. And I want his guns taken from him. It can be a niece, a neighbor, a best friend, a family member, an ex-wife. Anyone who has a grudge against you can go, I think they're dangerous. I filled out the right form. Go take their guns. That is a complete suspension of due process. It's the elimination of due process. And no one should support it. And for people like the NRA and Hickok and all their other cronies of the NRA, when they support it, they should be ashamed of themselves. And you should let them know they should be ashamed of themselves. So there's no excuse for it. They know it's not due process. They know it's not appropriate. They're just willing to say it because it fills their pockets with cash. So hold them accountable for what they say. Pay attention to the actual laws because red flag laws are a horrible thing. They're un-American. They are the elimination of due process, and none of us should allow them to become law.
Oops.
Go ahead. Lady at 46 South Road.
Take the guns first, go through due process second. Take the guns first, go through due process second.
Oops.